Mystic, Connecticut. You hear the name, and you probably picture, old ships, docks, that whole New England seaside vibe.
Absolutely. It definitely has that strong image. And what's interesting is technically it's not even its own town.
Right. It's actually like a historic village spread across Groton and Stonington.
Exactly. But that doesn't make its history any less rich. It's packed.
Not at all. So today, that's what we're diving into. We want to trace Mystic's whole story, really, from its roots as Pequot land through its peak as this, major maritime center, right up to how it became the heritage site we know today.
It's a fascinating journey of transformation, all centered around that river.
And the name itself, Mystic, comes right from that, doesn't it?
Yep.
From the Pequot term,
Yeah,
Mystic.
yeah, meaning large tidal river.
Yeah,
It connects directly back to the landscape and the original people.
a perfect linguistic anchor. So our plan for this deep dive is to navigate through all of it, the indigenous history, the colonial period, that incredible maritime golden age, the later industrial shifts, and then the big push for preservation, basically giving you the essential guide to Mystic's evolution.
A focused look, yeah, into a really compelling piece of American history.
Okay, so let's start way back. Before any shipyards, before European settlement really took hold, this area was the heartland of the Pequot Nation.
Right. Their territory, Quinnipiac, covered southeastern Connecticut, and the Mystic River was, well, absolutely crucial for them.
They were a major force in the region, weren't they? Pretty populous.
Oh, yeah. Around 26 villages, historians think, strategically placed along the rivers and coast.
And the land itself sounds like it was incredibly rich. Early accounts almost paint it as a paradise.
Definitely. Abundant game, loads of fish, fertile soil for crops. It was a sustaining environment.
And the Pequot were highly skilled, not just hunters and farmers, but artisans too, especially with wampum.
Ah, yes, wampum. Those shell bees were incredibly important, spiritually, culturally, politically, and definitely economically.
It wasn't just decoration, right? It was like currency. It recorded treaties. It held deep meaning. And it became central to their first interactions with Europeans.
Initially with the Dutch, yeah. Those early contacts were mostly about trade furs, wampum for European goods.
But things changed when the English arrived,
They did. The dynamic shifted, and trust started to break down pretty significantly.
leading to that really tragic event around 1634. A key Pequot leader, a sachem, was kidnapped and murdered by the English even after a ransom was paid in wampum.
A huge betrayal that
Yeah.
really fractured relations and unfortunately set the stage for conflict.
The Pequot War, 1636 to 1638, driven by tensions over land, trade, colonial expansion.
All of it building up. And a horrific central event of that war was the Mystic Massacre, May 26, 1637.
Just brutal. Colonial forces, led by Captains John Mason and John Underhill, attacked the main fortified Pequot village here in Mystic before dawn.
They set fire to the palisade, the wooden walls.
And as people tried to escape the flames, mostly women, children, older folks, they were systematically hunted down and killed. The estimates are just devastating.
Yeah, somewhere between 300 and 700 Pequot people lost their lives in that one attack.
It effectively crushed the Pequot nation's power.
Absolutely. And the aftermath was just as brutal. Survivors were hunted, killed, or even sold into slavery in the West Indies.
And then the Treaty of Hartford in 1638 officially tried to dissolve the Pequot nation entirely. A really dark chapter.
It really is. But, amidst that horror, there's also this incredible story of Pequot resilience.
Right. Despite everything, the Eastern Pequot tribal nation survived. They managed to establish a reservation in North Stonington by the 1670s.
A testament to their endurance. And they're still there today, working to preserve their heritage.
And it's sobering to think that the recognized site of the massacre itself is within the bounds of what's now the Mystic River Historic District.
Yeah, a place we'll talk more about.
Okay, so moving past that tragedy, the period after the war sees English settlement really taking off in the Mystic area.
It does. The Connecticut colony starts granting land, and often it went to veterans of the Pequot War. Sort of a reward solidifying English control.
And that's when we see names like John Winthrop the Younger, Robert Burroughs, George Dennison, Thomas Minor popping up as major landowners.
Right, those early figures. And the general consensus points to around 1654 as the date for permanent European settlement really getting established.
It wasn't entirely smooth sailing for the settlers either, was it? There
No.
were boundary squabbles between the colonies.
Oh yeah, early on, Connecticut versus Massachusetts Bay. For a little while, Mystic actually fell under Massachusetts jurisdiction.
Oh, Didn't know that.
Yeah, until the Thames River was finally set as the boundary.
So fast forward to the 18th century, and we start seeing actual villages forming along the Mystic River, not just scattered farms.
Exactly. Three main spots emerge. First, just Mystic, which we now call Old Mystic, up at the head of the river. That became the biggest early settlement. Then you had Lower Mystic, later Mystic Bridge, on the Stonington side, the East Bank. By the early 1800s, just maybe a dozen houses there, clustered near modern Willow Street, plus a key ferry landing.
And the third.
Portersville, later called Mystic River, on the Groton side, the West Bank, right across from Lower Mystic. These three nuclei eventually grew together.
And the economy back then was pretty mixed, right? Not just ships yet.
No, definitely a mix. Farming was obviously crucial. Road development, like using the old Pequot Trail for moving goods and livestock, was important too.
Like sense.
Plus some early small-scale manufacturing. And naturally, the maritime trade started picking up steam as the villages grew along the river.
And we see practical things like Robert Burroughs starting a ferry service across the river around 1660. People needed to get back and forth.
Absolutely. And community institutions started to form. Public schools, remarkably early, like 1679.
Wow, that is early.
Shows a value placed on education. And churches started popping up, becoming social centers.
It paints this picture of the early lifestyle, that farmer shipwright idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Farming in the summer, maybe building small boats or taking trade voyages south or to the Caribbean in the winter. Resourceful people.
And that really laid the groundwork, didn't it, for what came next?
It absolutely did, because the late 18th century is when Mystic really begins its transformation into this shipbuilding powerhouse. The Golden Age starts.
Okay, this is the era everyone associates with Mystic. Between, 1784 and 1919, the output was just incredible.
Astonishing. Estimates range from over 600 documented vessels up to maybe 1,400 if you count every little fishing boat.
And not just one type of boat. Everything from small fishing sloops right up to massive merchant ships, those famous fast clippers, even early steamships.
An amazing range and volume for what was still a relatively small community. And this was driven by some really key shipyards and families.
Let's talk about some of them. George Greenman and Co. has to be first, right? Founded 1837 by the Greenman brothers.
George, Clark, and Thomas. Yeah, their yard was right where Mystic Seaport Museum is today. A major player for decades.
They started local but quickly went bigger.
Right. Fishing boats first, then coastal traders, then ocean-going vessels. And they were innovative. Built an early screw-propelled steamboat, the Florida, way back in 1844.
Ahead of the curve.
Definitely. And then they fully embraced the clipper ship era. The David Crockett, launched in 1853, was one of the biggest built in Mystic. Massive ship for its time.
And the Greenmans did more than just build ships, didn't they? They built a whole village.
They did. Greenmanville. Worker housing, a woolen mill they started in 49, even their own church. The Greenmanville Seventh-day Baptist Church, a complete industrial community.
Shows how intertwined everything was. What about Charles Mallory?
Ah, Charles Mallory. Came to Mystic as a sailmaker in 1816, worked his way up, became a hugely successful ship owner and builder by the 1860s. Very sharp businessman.
And he was key in bringing clipper ship construction to Mystic.
Absolutely. Launched his first clipper in 1851, built all sorts, sailing ships, steamers, supplied ships to the Union Navy during the Civil War, too. And he was a big agent in the whaling business.
And his original sail loft is still there, at the seaport.
It is. A direct link back to him. Amazing piece of preservation.
Incredible. Who else was significant?
Well, there was Maxon Fishing Co. over in West Mystic. Started around 1850. They built some notable ships, too, like the Clipper BFHOXIE and the Union Ironclad Galena.
An ironclad from Mystic, wow.
Yeah. And then Irons and Grinnell, known for ships in the cotton trade, and famously the Clipper Andrew Jackson.
Ah, the Andrew Jackson. That's the one with the supposed speed record, New York to San Francisco.
That's the one. 89 days, 4 hours in winter. An incredible feat. Speaks volumes about the ship and the captain, Johnny Williams.
Absolutely. And we should mention the Mystic Shipyard, too, right? An older one?
Yeah, established 1843, built schooners, some ironclads early on. Later, around 1900, they shifted more towards pleasure yachts. Built the Jenny R. Dubois in 1902, the largest sailing vessel ever built in Mystic, actually.
So this wasn't just sporadic building. Mystic was a real hub. 21 classic clippers in just 10 years, the 1850s.
Prolific. And during the Civil War, their production just exploded. More tonnage than any other port its size in the country, especially those crucial steamers for the Union.
And running parallel to all the shipbuilding was the whaling industry.
Right, a big part of the economy for about 30 years, from 1832 to 1862, roughly.
First voyage left in 32. And over those years, how many voyages?
About 102 voyages, launched by 28 different Mystic-based whaling ships. They sailed everywhere, South Atlantic, Pacific, Indian Ocean. Generally stayed out of the Arctic, though.
And it was profitable.
Hugely. Catches valued at over $2.6 million back then. That's sperm oil, regular whale oil, whalebone. A lot of money. Ships like the Meteor, Robin Hood, Shepherdess, Aeronaut did particularly well.
And who owned these ships? Was it just a few guys?
Surprisingly widespread, actually. Over 300 individuals, mostly local Mystic people, had shares in these voyages, and it employed a lot of local men.
How many, roughly?
Estimates are around 3,100 men over that period. And the crews were diverse, included free black men, formerly enslaved men, even very rarely women on board.
That's fascinating. So shipbuilding and whaling were the giants, but fishing and coastal trade were always humming along too.
Oh, absolutely vital. Provided a steady economic boost. The Mystic River itself was full of fish, historically. And the lobster fishery, especially centered in nearby Noank, was huge in the 19th century, shipping hundreds of lobsters a day sometimes.
Oh.
Yeah, specialized boats for that, like the Well Smacks the MSC Barry is a famous example.
Yeah.
And fishing schooners like the L.A. Dunton. Coastal shipping also remained key for moving goods regionally.
And external events like wars, they impacted Mystic significantly too.
Definitely. The War of 1812, interestingly, some say it actually helped push Mystic more toward shipbuilding, created demand.
And Mystic locals helped defend Stonington from the British in 1814.
They did. Captain Jeremiah Holmes and about 16 volunteers. They even set up a makeshift defense, Fort Rachel, with just one cannon. Real local heroism.
Amazing. And then the Civil War.
That just supercharged the shipyards again. Massive demand for Union Navy ships, transport vessels. The Green Man Yard built large steamers. Maxon, Fishing Co., built the ironclad Galena. The Mallorys contributed heavily. Mystic was all in for the Union effort.
So Mystic hits this incredible peak in the mid to late 19th century, a true maritime powerhouse. But things started to change, didn't they?
They always do. Yeah, the latter half of the 19th century brought huge shifts. The very things that made Mystic boom wooden ships, whaling, started to decline.
Technology, right. Steam power, iron, and steel hulls.
Exactly. They made the traditional wooden sailing ships and the skills needed to build them less essential. Shipbuilding started moving elsewhere, to places with better access to iron and coal, like up in Maine.
So the big yards started to wind down.
Yeah, Green Man & Co. launched their last vessel in 1878. Some smaller yards kept building schooners and yachts into the early 20th century, but the main era was over. And whaling, as we said, had pretty much ended locally by the 1860s.
But Mystic didn't just dry up and blow away. It adapted.
It did. Showed that resilience again. New industries rose up, especially textiles, often moving right into the spaces left empty by the shipyards.
Like the Greenmans diversifying into their woolen mill earlier, but the really big one was the Rossi Velvet Mill, right? Late 1890s?
Yes, that was a huge development. The Rossi family had connections to German velvet making. And interestingly, the McKinley Tariff of 1890 actually encouraged them to set up production here in the U.S.
So they chose Mystic, and it became the town's biggest employer.
By far. Started with maybe 35 workers, grew to hundreds, maybe up to 500 at its peak.
Yeah.
They brought in skilled weavers from Germany.
So that changed the makeup of Greenmanville.
It really did. Gave it this distinct German flavor, maybe some French-Canadian influence too, common in New England mills. Became a real mill village.
How long did the Rossi Mill last?
Provided jobs for decades. It struggled during the Depression, even closed temporarily in 1937, but reorganized and kept going until 1958. There were other smaller factories too, making things like soap and razors.
And the 20th century brought its own major challenges beyond industrial shifts.
Oh, absolutely. The Great Depression hit Mystic hard, like everywhere else. The Rossi Mill closing temporarily was a big blow, but it's kind of amazing. Right in the middle of that, December 1929, the Marine Historical Association gets founded.
The seed of Mystic Seaport Museum, founded during the Depression.
Yeah. Shows this incredible foresight, this desire to preserve the maritime past, just as it seemed to be fading. They even acquired their first boat, the Annie, in 1931, right in the thick of it.
That's commitment. And then came the Hurricane of 38.
The Great New England Hurricane. Just catastrophic for the whole region.
Huge damage in Mystic.
Immense. Power lines down, fires, storm surge, homes, businesses, docks destroyed. The marine community got hit incredibly hard. Even the Charles W. Morgan whale ship, which wasn't even at the seaport yet, got damaged. Fishing fleets were devastated.
Wow. But somehow, out of all this, the idea of tourism started to really take hold.
It did. The natural beauty was always there, and that deep history. It had appeal. It just needed to be sort of packaged and presented, and that's where the big attractions came in.
Mystic Seaport Museum, obviously, being the huge catalyst, founded 29, really growing after the war.
Absolutely. Its mission to preserve and interpret the seafaring past gave people a reason to come, to connect with that history. It just drew more and more visitors over time.
And then in 1973, you get two more major additions almost simultaneously.
Right. Mystic Aquarium opens in October 73, backed by Kelvin Smith. Focused on marine life, conservation, education, a different angle but complementary.
With the belugas becoming iconic later on.
Exactly. And just a month earlier, September 73, Old Mystic Village opens.
The themed shopping village. Kind of like a step back in time, but for shopping and eating.
Yeah, conceived by Joyce and Jerry Olson. A different kind of attraction, but it broadened the appeal. These three institutions, really, working together, cemented Mystic as a major tourist destination.
It's such an interesting pivot, isn't it? From making things ships, textiles, to preserving things, preserving the past.
It really is. And in a strange way, the economic decline of the old industries actually helped. It meant a lot of the 19th century buildings and the general layout survived.
Arrested development, as they sometimes call it, became an asset.
Exactly. And Mystic Seaport Museum is the absolute embodiment of that preservation effort.
19 acres, right on the river, on the old Greenman shipyard site. That connection is powerful.
It is. And their collection is just world-class. Over 500 historic boats, including 4 National Historic Landmark vessels, the Charles W. Morgan, the Joseph Conrad, the L.A. Dunton, the Sabino steamboat.
And the recreated village, bringing in historic buildings from all over, it feels so authentic. Plus, the working shipyard.
The Henry B. DuPont Preservation Shipyard.
Yeah,
Keeping those traditional skills alive. And the research side is huge, too. The library, the collection center with millions of artifacts and photos.
Plus all the educational programs, the scale model. It's incredibly comprehensive.
It really is. And Mystic Aquarium, while newer, is also a key part of that heritage and conservation picture.
Right. Focusing on the living ocean, complementing the seaport's history focus. Their exhibits are famous.
The belugas, yeah, the only ones in New England. Stellar sea lions, penguins. They're a major research and conservation center, too. Accredited by the AZA and AMMPA. Did pioneering work in beluga breeding.
They've won national awards, though they've also faced some scrutiny recently, haven't they?
Yes, particularly concerning some beluga deaths, which has brought public attention and discussion. It's part of the ongoing reality for institutions handling marine mammals.
And beyond the big institutions, the town itself is like a museum with all the historic architecture.
It really is. Walking around, you see the whole story laid out, the grand captain's houses, the simpler mill workers' cottages, styles from colonial right through Greek Revival, Italianate, Queen Anne.
And those 3 official historic districts really capture different eras.
Right. The Mystic River District in Groton, that's West Mystic, noted for just how complete it feels as a 19th century village. Over 260 historic buildings. Includes the sites of Fort Rachel and the Mystic Massacre.
Then the Mystic Bridge District on the Stonington side, including the Seacourt, Greenmanville, the Bascule Bridge. That's the Maritime Village heartland.
Exactly. And the Rossi Velvet Mill District, focusing on that later industrial period, the mill complex, and the housing around it.
Plus individual landmarks like the Dennison Homestead from 1717 Whitehall Mansion, and the Bascule Bridge itself is iconic.
Totally. That bridge opening up is classic Mystic.
And the culture, the social life, it's always been tied to the sea and the work people did.
Absolutely. You see it in the value placed on education from way back. Even student essays from the 1830s show kids knew about global trade routes.
Because it was their parents' livelihood.
Exactly. And institutions like the Mystic and Noank Library, gifted by a sea captain, Captain Elihu Spicer, become community anchors. Lots of churches founded over the years, too, reflecting the community's values.
And you still have active groups like the Mystic River Historical Society working to preserve that history.
Yeah, founded in 73. And the Old Mystic History Center, too. There's this deep commitment in the community to its past.
Which you still feel today, right? With the festivals, the parades. It feels like a place that knows its story.
Definitely. A strong sense of identity rooted in that history.
So thinking about all this history, we have to acknowledge the people, the individuals, and families who drove it all.
Absolutely crucial. Starting with the Pequot leaders, whose land this originally was.
And the early English settlers, Dennison, Minor, Gallup.
Then the giants of the shipbuilding era, the Greenman family building ships and a community, the Mallorys, Charles and Charles Henry building a maritime empire,
The Maxons and the Fishes with their shipyard, the Irons and Grinnells building those fast clippers.
and the whaling captains Clift, McGinley, Eldridge, Baker, and the agents managing the business like Mallory again, and the Randalls.
Then the people who built the modern mystic, in a way. Captain Spicer with the library, the Seaport founders, Bradley, Cutler, Stillman, Kelvin Smith for the aquarium, the Olsons for Old Mystic Village, the Rossi family for the mill.
A long list, and others connected to Jeremiah Holmes, the War of 1812 hero, Mary Jo Akeley, the explorer, even more recent figures like Matt Harvey, the pitcher, or Adam Young, the baker, Bogart and Bacall honeymooning there.
Spielberg filming Amistad at the seaport.
Right. All these threads connect, and it circles back to that idea. The rise and fall of industries shaped the place, and the preservation of that 19th century character became the foundation for its next chapter as a heritage destination.
A really amazing arc.
It truly is.
So wrapping up our deep dive here, we've journeyed through Mystic's entire story. Pequot homeland, colonial settlement, maritime boom, industrial shifts, and its current role as this guardian of history.
Yeah, the key themes that keep coming up are resilience, adaptation, and that unbreakable bond with the sea. It defines the place.
The scale of what they achieved in shipbuilding is just wild to think about now. And ships like the Charles W. Morgan are such powerful symbols. The preservation work is just top-notch.
It really makes Mystic a living museum, doesn't it? A vivid window into America's maritime soul, its accessible, tangible history.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. How does a place make that shift so successfully? From being defined by industry to being defined by preserving the memory of that industry. And what can other towns maybe learn from Mystic's unique voyage through time? It makes you think about how relevant maritime history still is, even now.
A great question to ponder. History isn't just in the past, it shapes the present.
Indeed. Until next time, keep exploring.